The sky burned with orange streaks as the ship tore through the atmosphere of the forgotten mining planet. Its engines coughing fire, its hull cracked from battle. Leah could feel the weight of fear in her chest as she clutched the edge of the escape pod and stared at the ground below, which came closer with every passing second. She had no idea if she would survive the landing, but she knew staying on the slave ship meant certain death, or worse, she had seen too many of her people dragged away. Their minds broken, their bodies branded, their will stolen, and she refused to become one of them. She was not strong, she was not trained, she had no weapon, but she had one thing left. She had her mind and a chance to run the pod hit the surface with. A violent jolt throwing her forward into a wall of hard steel. Pain shot through her side, but she did not stop. She crawled out through the smoke, her hands shaking, her legs weak. The sun here was pale and sickly, casting a dim light over rocky hills and shattered ground. Her feet found unstable soil, and she stumbled forward away from the crash. No plan, no map, only movement driven by instinct and the memory of what they had done to her home, her people, her family. For hours she wandered through broken canyons and jagged cliffs, her skin cut by thorns, her breath shallow. She found a narrow cave beneath a ledge and crawled inside, collapsing against the cold stone. She pressed her hand against her side, where her tunic was soaked with blood, and closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to listen. She had no idea what creatures lived on this planet, but she knew the mercenaries would come and search the sky. She saw them from the pod, black ships, hovering like shadows in the clouds. She needed to hide, but she also needed help, and in this alien world filled with danger, she had no idea where or who to trust. Then came the noise, faint at first, like metal scraping against rock, then heavier steps, boots crushing loose gravel, and a flashlight beam cutting through the cave opening. She curled up behind a rock, holding her breath, her body trembling as the light grew closer. It was not one of the slavers. She could tell that much by the sound of the breathing behind the helmet and the slow, careful steps. Whoever it was, they were not in a rush, not scanning with cold technology, but moving like someone who knew how to track. The light flickered again, this time pausing on the floor near her foot. He found here a man stepped into the cave, his armor worn and scratched like it had seen too many battles. His face, visible under the cracked helmet, was covered in dust and unshaved. He looked like a survivor, not a soldier anymore, but something between. The man raised his hand to signal peace, no weapons, just silence, then slowly crouched down without a word. His eyes scanned her, not with cruelty, not with command, but with quiet study, like he was trying to understand what she was not, what she was worth. She did not speak, her throat too dry, her fear still heavy. He reached into a small pack and took out a wrapped piece of cloth, soaked in water, and tossed it gently toward her. She hesitated, then grabbed at her hands. Shaking, she pressed it to her lips. The cool moisture felt like life itself. The man waited, watched, then sat down, leaning his back against the wall, still silent, like someone used to being alone, or someone who had stopped expecting. Thanks. Leah looked at him closer, now seeing the lines on his face, the scars that crossed his neck, the old patch on his shoulder with a symbol. She didn't know this man was not from her world, but something told her he had seen more than most. Something told her he had killed before, but he was not killing now, and that was enough. She whispered her name, unsure why she did. Maybe to remind herself she was still a person, maybe to see if he would respond. He looked at her for a long second, and then gave a small nod. His voice was rough when it came out, not loud, just plain. He told her his name was Dale, just Dale, no rank, no story, no question. They sat there as the sun sank lower, and the wind outside grew colder. Leah tried to sleep, but the images from the ship came back, burning her mind. She saw the cages, the lasers, the crying of her people, the cold hands that dragged her down the hallway, the tests, the collars, and then the escape that almost cost her life. Dale moved around the cave, checking the rocks, placing small metal devices at the entrance. She had no idea what they were. Maybe sensors, maybe traps, maybe he didn't trust her yet. Next morning, the sound of engines thundered through the sky, fast-moving ships scanning for signals. Dale grabbed a device and checked the readings, then looked at her with serious eyes and pointed to the back of the cave. She followed him into a narrow tunnel that led to an underground chamber filled with old crates, broken weapons, scattered tools, and wires glowing with faint energy. The place looked abandoned, but also prepared, like someone had spent years turning it into a safe hole in a dangerous world. He gave her food, a kind she had never tasted before, dry but rich with energy, and sat across from her cleaning an old rifle, not military grade but deadly enough. He did not ask who she was or what she ran from, and she did not ask why he was alone in this wasteland. Maybe they both understood some things didn't need to be spoken, at least not yet. Later that night, as Leia stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of old machines and the silence between them, she realized something strange had happened in the past. She had always feared humans the way the galaxy described them: wild, violent, untrustworthy. But this man with his quiet eyes and broken armor had saved her without question. He had seen her not as a weapon, not as a prize, but simply as someone who needed help. For the first time since her world fell, she felt something small and unfamiliar in her chest. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the shape of it, maybe the beginning. And above them the sky rumbled again. The war never stopped, but down here in the dirt, something different was starting to grow. The bunker felt like another world buried beneath stone and metal. It carried the scent of dust and old fire. The walls still hummed with forgotten energy pulses and faded signals from systems long past. Leia moved carefully through the maze of rusted machines and glowing panels, her fingers brushing against cables and glass containers. Her eyes filled with wonder and fear at how much she did not understand. Dale watched her from his workbench, where he sat adjusting a panel with a cracked screen and twisted wires. His hands moved with calm and memory, not rushing, not pausing, just doing what needed to be done, like he had done it 100 times before, like he would keep doing it even if no one watched. The silence between them was thick, but not cold. It was the kind of silence that came from two people who had no need for empty words. Dale had given her space, not with kindness, but with choice. He showed her the corner of the bunker where she could rest. He brought her food, placed it near her, and walked away, never staring, never pushing. He worked on weapons, checked scanners, moved quietly, and slept lightly, always near the door, always with one eye half open. Leia noticed the way he stood near exits, the way he never took his back to a dark corner, the way his hands never strayed far from the pulse rifle hanging by the wall. This was a man who trusted no one, not even himself. Days passed without measure. There was no sun to track time, only the rhythm of repairs and quiet footsteps. Leia began to move closer, not with words, but with actions. She cleaned her own space, gathered tools, tried to help even when she didn't know what they were for. Dale never thanked her, but he also never stopped her. And that was enough for now. He was a wall of silence and strength, but not cruel, not distant. He listened even when he didn't answer, and he noticed everything, even when he never looked directly at her. One night after eating in silence, Leia sat across from him near the fire pit he had built from salvaged engine parts. She held a broken cum device in her hand, trying to figure out what it did. The pieces made no sense to her, not yet, but she wanted to understand. Dale watched her for a while, then took the device and turned it over, showing her a hidden latch. Inside was a core light still flickering. Weak but alive, he pointed to the wires and told her what they meant, which ones gave power, which ones carried signal, which ones could kill her if crossed wrong. His voice was low and rough, like stone dragged across stone, but it was not cold. Was teaching that night. She slept with the device near her head, her fingers still clutching the tools she had borrowed from his bench in her sleep. She whispered names, words from her language, soft and full of longing, and Dale heard them, but said nothing. He turned away and kept his watch, his hand resting on the rifle, his eyes scanning the dark tunnel beyond the gate. Later in the week, Leia found him working at a tall, narrow transmitter, bent and broken, its core missing. She asked him what it was, and he told her it used to send messages across systems, but now it was just dead metal. She asked if it could be fixed, and he paused for a long moment, then said maybe and maybe was enough for her. To try, she gathered parts with shaking hands. Brought him wires and pieces of shattered tech. He did not ask why she was helping, and she did not explain. Both of them simply moved in rhythm. A quiet agreement growing between them, not with words, but with shared silence and effort. Then came the signal. A long, slow pulse cut through the scanner on the wall, a coded frequency. Not from any nearby ship, but high orbit, sharp and clean, the kind that only bounty hunters used. Dale stiffened, turned toward the panel, and read the wave. His jaw tightened. And Leah saw something shift in his eyes, something dangerous and old, not fear, but readiness. He stood without a word. Began packing weapons, loading cells into rifles, checking traps at the edge of the bunker. Leah followed, asking what it meant, and he told her the hunters were close, maybe hours, maybe less, and they were not here to talk. She asked if they could run, and he looked at her like he already knew the answer. His voice came low, like the weight of stone. He said, if they run, they will die. If they fight, they might still die, but at least on their feet. She asked why he was helping her, still not understanding, and he turned away as if the question tasted like fire in his mouth. Finally he said, because once someone helped him when no one else would, and he owed it to someone to pass it on. That night he showed her a map of the cave system, tunnels that ran deep and far, ways to escape if she needed. He told her where to hide, how long she should wait before running if he did not return. Leah listened, her hands shaking, but her eyes strong. She told him she would not leave him behind, but he only gave a tired smile and said he had lived enough years to know when a fight was his to hold alone before sleeping. He handed her a device, old and dusty, shaped like a triangle, with a glowing light in the center. He told her it was a beacon used to call long-range ships across the sector, but it only worked once, and when it was activated it would burn itself out. He had repaired it just in case, and now it was hers to use, not to waste. Leah held the beacon in her hand, feeling its hum like a heartbeat, like a choice she had never asked for, and yet now it belonged to her. She looked at Dale as he sharpened his blade and tested a shock mine, and she wondered what kind of man could prepare to die for someone he barely knew. That night, as the wind howled outside and the stars above watched in silence, Leah lay awake, thinking of her people, thinking of the prison ship, thinking of the cage they had tried to lock her inside, and how this human stranger, this man from a world everyone feared, had chosen to stand beside her, not for gain, not for duty, but for something else, something older than law, older than power, something she had never seen before, but now could feel growing in her chest like light breaking through smoke. Trust was not a word she had believed in before, but now as she watched Dale guard the entrance with eyes that saw every shadow and every angle, she realized trust was not always built from kindness. Sometimes it was built from fire and steel and choices made without asking for thanks. And in the silence before dawn, she whispered one promise to herself, one truth she would carry forever. She would not forget him. The sky above the mountains turned black with clouds that did not belong to nature, heavy and unnatural. They rolled in fast, blocking the stars and the weak light of the moon-like sun. The wind changed its song, now carrying a low humming sound that echoed through the canyons, as if machines whispered in the air. Leah stood near the bunker entrance, her eyes fixed on the distant sky, and her hands clenched tightly around the beacon. Dale had given her. Her chest felt like it was sinking into itself, her breath hard to hold, her heart refusing to stay calm. Dale came up behind her, checking the rangefinder in his hand. The screen flickered with red blips. 3 incoming signals, no identification, no answer to come attempts. They were not friends, not allies, and definitely not passing through. These were hunters, fast and efficient killers hired by the Empire to retrieve escaped assets and erase witnesses. Dale already knew the pattern they would use. He had seen it before. Drop small scout units along the ridge, form a perimeter, send in the drones to sniff out heat and movement, then move in with guns drawn and words. Last he pulled Leah away from the door and led her back inside the bunker, moving quickly, but not with panic. He moved like someone who had lived through this kind of storm Many times someone who knew what to do and when to stop hoping that anyone else would fix it inside the walls, he opened a hidden case sealed in the floor, containing older weapons. Not shiny, not high-tech, just dependable battered pieces of war that had survived more than their fair share of fire. Dale checked each one, reloaded, replaced cells, and handed a small one to Leah, telling her it was only for defense, that she was not to fight unless she had no choice. Her hands trembled as she took it, but she nodded because she knew this time was real. Together they set traps in the tunnels, mines that hissed when touched, sensors that flashed when movement crossed the wire. Dale showed her how to activate the gate override, how to use the emergency tunnel, how to lock it behind her, and how to destroy the controls if needed. She listened to every word, every instruction, memorizing it all with a kind of fear that did not scream, but crawled under the skin, quiet and tight. He told her when to leave and where to run, and when she asked what he would do after that, he said nothing, just loaded another rifle and looked toward the sky. That evening they ate in silence, sitting on crates, the fire burning low, the sound of engines in the sky growing louder with each hour. Dale sharpened a blade that looked older than both of them, and Leah watched his hands, the way they never shook, the way his eyes stayed steady. She wanted to ask why he was really doing this, but part of her already knew, and the rest did not matter anymore. She had seen something in him that the galaxy had hidden from her all her life. Not cruelty, not conquest, but a kind of human loyalty that defied logic. It did not come from orders or profit. It came from choice and will, and something deeper that she did not have a name for. As the night deepened, the first scout drone passed overhead, its lights slicing through the dark like a knife. Dale ducked low, pulled her with him, and waited until it passed. The sensor traps began to blink one by one. They were coming, not fast, not loud, but certain. They moved like a wave that never stopped. It was only a matter of time before they reached the bunker. Dale turned to her, and without saying anything handed her a small bag of supplies, rations, a water pack, the beacon, and the old scanner. He told her to go now before the real storm began. She refused, said she would fight too, said she would stay and face them with him. But he shook his head slowly and pointed to the emergency shaft, telling her it was not her fight to finish. Her people needed her. Someone had to live to tell the story, and it could not be him, not this time. She did not want to leave. Not after everything, not now that she understood what he was. Not just a fighter, not just a protector, but something even rarer. Someone who stood against darkness, even when no one would remember his name. Someone who had nothing left and still chose to shield someone else. But Dale was already turning away, checking the perimeter, loading his gear, placing charges near the narrow hallways, and setting the last codes on the remote detonator. His back was straight, his steps firm. There was no hesitation in him, no fear, only readiness, like a man walking into fire, not to win, but to hold the line. Leah took one last look at him, her throat tight, her eyes stinging, then crawled into the tunnel, clutching the beacon to her chest. The metal of the passage was cold and narrow, pressing close around her as she slid deeper into the dark. The noise behind her began to change, now louder, now filled with the cracks of weapons and the shouts of men and machines. The sound of a war, not on a battlefield but in a buried grave built by an old soldier who refused to run. She could not see him anymore, but in her mind she heard the echo of his words, telling her to live, telling her to run, telling her to remember. And as the tunnel closed behind her, sealing her away from the burning chaos above, she whispered his name once, not as a plea, but as a promise. She would not forget what he gave her. Not ever. The bunker shook with each explosion above, layers of stone trembling like frightened skin, the walls around Leah pulsed with pressure and heat as the battle raged overhead in the winding passage behind her. Every sound felt sharp, every echo felt alive. Her breath came heavy, her hands pressed against the cold earth, her body curled tight around the beacon Dale had given her, and her heart beat in time with the thumping above like drums from a war she could not see, but could never forget. She wanted to go back. Her mind shouted to return. Her soul ached to stand beside him, but the tunnel had closed. Behind her, sealed with the old locking code he had shown her, fingers trembling in memory. She tried once to override it, but the steel door stayed shut, strong and final and unforgiving. She knew he had done that to protect her, not to trap her. Still, it felt like a prison made of mercy and choice above. Dale moved through smoke and fire like a shadow that would not fall. He had counted the seconds between each breach. The rhythm of the hunters advancing was something he understood, like a song from another life. It reminded him of places he had tried to forget, trenches burned into frozen moons, battles in ruined cities where names were lost and only blood remembered. Now he stood in this old, half-broken bunker where no army waited. No backup was coming, and no one would write his name in any book. But that was fine for him. It had always been fine, because his fight had never been for glory. It was always for something smaller and greater than that, for the ones who could not fight, for the ones who ran, for the ones who still dreamed. He moved to the central corridor where the motion sensors blinked, and the faint sound of footsteps echoed closer. His traps were already doing their work, bursts of fire and gas, slowing the mercenaries as they tried to breach the inner wall. The mines he had hidden beneath the floor had exploded in perfect timing, scattering their formation, forcing them to move with caution. But they were many, and they were armed with weapons made to kill fast and clean, and they would not stop until they found what they were sent for. Dale knew they expected something easy. They expected a bunker filled with junk and one weak girl, maybe a lone guard, maybe an old soldier without fire left. But what they found was different. What they found was a man who had nothing to lose and every reason to fight. He waited in the corner, rifle in hand, energy cell blinking low but still alive. His other hand held a trigger for the last charge, hidden behind the back panel. If they made it past him, he would bring the ceiling down, bury the entrance, seal the passage where Leah waited deep below, not because he wanted to die, but because she needed to live. Door burst open, and they came fast, black armor and red visors, their voices sharp, their rifles louder. But Dale was already moving, already firing, each shot placed with precision, each movement practiced through years of silent wars. He ducked low, rolled behind cover, returned fire as sparks lit the corridor. The metal walls screamed with each blast. But Dale never stopped moving. He knew the ground like he knew the shape of his own hands. Every turn, every vent, every crack was part of his strategy. He heard their voices shouting commands, but he didn't care. Their language meant nothing to him. Their mission meant even less. What mattered was that Leah was safe, and that meant he had already won, even if his body would not leave this place. A shot grazed his arm, but he didn't feel it. Another hit his shoulder and pushed him back, but he stayed on his feet. He switched to the blade when the last charge in his rifle drained, and as the first soldier rushed in, Dale struck fast, cutting through the armor with old brutal skill. The second followed, and Dale fought like the man he once was, not with rage, not with panic, but with purpose, pure and cold and clear. They began to fall, but still more came, and the room began to fill with smoke and noise, and the smell of plasma burning through metal. Dale's breath grew shorter, his vision blurred. But his hands still worked, his legs still moved, his will still burned brighter than the lights above. Somewhere in the fight, he felt the sharp punch of a blast hit his side. He staggered and dropped to one knee, but did not fall, not yet. He pulled himself up, used the wall for balance, and took the last charge from his belt, fitting it into the old backup pistol he had kept since the war, the one with the scratched words on the grip that read "Never Again." He aimed through smoke, saw the last three coming, saw their formation, knew their path, and fired, not wild, not desperate, but perfect. One shot, two shots, three clean flashes, and then stillness, only the slow drip of cooling metal and the distant hum of the bunker walls returning to silence. Dale stood alone in the middle of the room, smoke curling around him, blood running down his side, his breath heavy and broken. He looked toward the sealed tunnel, knowing she was still down there, safe, alive and waiting, and maybe crying, but stronger than before. Stronger because she had seen what humanity could be when stripped of everything but choice. He dropped the gun, let it fall to the floor as his legs gave out, and he slid to the wall, sitting back against it, his hand pressed to his side, his vision now dim and full of shadows. But in those shadows he saw her face, not scared, not weak, but brave, like fire wrapped in calm. He smiled, not because he was happy, but because he had done what he said he would do, and that was enough. His head tilted back, resting against the wall, the heat of battle fading into cold air, the weight of silence pressing down. He closed his eyes, not with fear, not with sadness, but with peace, because in that moment he knew the girl had survived, and she would remember. And maybe, just maybe, someone out there would hear her when she told the story of the man who stood and did not fall until the last light faded, and in the darkness that followed nothing moved, but everything changed. The sky above the resistance base shimmered with colors that danced along the edge of the atmosphere like forgotten flames returned to life. Ships moved quietly between stations, carrying supplies, signals, and survivors. But the real fire burned inside Leah as she stood before the gathering, her voice soft but steady, her eyes lit with something stronger than fear or memory. She was no longer the girl who had crawled through caves with blood on her hands and dust in her lungs. She was something more now, something that had survived, something that had seen what many had only heard in whispers. They asked her to speak, not because she was famous, not because she was powerful, but because she carried a story that refused to be buried, a truth that could not be silenced. The hall was full. Beings from every corner of the galaxy sat in silence, waiting for her words. Senators, scholars, rebels, engineers, warriors. Each of them had fought their own battles, lost their own homes, buried their own names. But when she spoke, the room held its breath, as if her voice alone could hold back the cold. She told them about her home, about the ships that came in silence, about the chains, the walls, the screams. She told them how she had escaped, not through strength, not through weapons, but through desperation, through the fire of her last will. She told them about the crash, about the cave, about the human man who had found her when she was no more than a shadow shaking in the dark. She told them how he said nothing at first, how he gave her space and water and tools, how he did not treat her like property or threat, but like a person. She told them about his silence, about his scars, about his way of moving without noise and speaking without waste. She described how he gave her the beacon, how he fixed it without asking for thanks, how he showed her where to run when the sky began to scream. She told them about the storm, about the mercenaries, about the traps and the weapons, and the quiet plan of a man who knew he would not leave the mountain alive, but who never once tried to leave her behind. She told them about the last moment, how she begged him not to fight alone, how he made her promise to run, how he sealed the door, not with cruelty, but with care. She described the sound of the battle, the blasts, the fire, the silence that followed, and how when she climbed out of the tunnel days later, with her body torn and her soul hollow, she found nothing left but ashes, steel, and one handprint burned into the wall near the collapsed gate. She said his name and the room did not move. She said it again, and this time it echoed back to her, not from speakers, but from the people themselves, whispering it like a prayer or a song. She told them he had no family, no badge, no uniform, only a promise and a choice, and that was what saved her. Not a flag, not a fleet, not a great power, but one man who stood his ground, because he believed someone should. She did not cry, though her voice cracked. She did not pause, though her legs trembled. She did not break, though the memory weighed heavier with each breath. She had carried this truth across systems, across battles, across nights where sleep would not come, and now she gave it to them, not as a plea, but as a gift. The hall stood in silence for a long time after she finished, and in that silence something shifted. The image of humans in their minds changed, not all at once, not with full trust, but with a threat of something new, not fear, not awe, but respect. The kind of respect that comes not from might, but from sacrifice. Leia returned to her work after that, but she was no longer a survivor hidden in shadow. She became a voice, a flame that moved from world to world, speaking to those who had lost, who had run, who had wondered if anything good still existed in the dark. She carried his name, like a flag without fabric, like a fire without smoke, and wherever she went the story followed. Some claimed they had found remains in the mountain, others said no one could have lived through the final blast. Some believed Dale had died there with the last of his charges. Others said he had escaped, somehow vanished into the stars, and watched from afar. But Leah knew the truth, and that truth was not in bones or smoke, but in the way people listened, in the way they remembered, in the way they chose to stand. Years passed and the war twisted and turned, and peace came in pieces, not as a flood but as a slow rebuilding. But his story remained carved in memory, carried on lips, written into songs, and etched onto the sides of broken weapons, now kept as relics in shrines across rebel outposts. Leah, now older, now stronger, now someone who had bled and healed and spoken to millions, stood again one night, under a quiet sky, holding the same beacon he had given her, still intact, still glowing gently, and she whispered his name into the wind, not to summon him, not to mourn, but to honor, because she had never forgotten him, because he had taught her something no weapon could teach. That courage was not about winning or surviving, but about choosing to protect even when no one would see, choosing to fight even when no one would remember, choosing to love the world enough to stand between it and the fire. And on that lonely world, where he had fallen or risen or vanished, his name still lived in every stone, in every wind, in every whisper between the stars. Was human, and the girl he saved would never forget it. The end.